And so I would ask our clerk, Ms. Fawcett, to do the confirm that we have quorum and to do our introductions for this evening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Chair, and through you. Welcome everyone to this evening's Planning Committee meeting. I can confirm that we do have quorum. Currently absent are Councillor Kiley and Councillor Chappelle. Joining us from staff are Tim Park, Director of Planning Services, James Barr, Manager of Development Approvals, Janice Grant, Senior Planner, Ricardo Peggi, Planner. We also have Blair Johnson joining us as host, and I am Elizabeth Fawcett, Committee Clerk for the Planning Committee. We currently have 4 agents and applicants on the call this evening to assist with the files, and we have 17 members of the public. And with that, Mr. Vice Chair, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great, and I'm going to read the collection notice. The meetings tonight being held, or the meetings being held tonight, are public meetings under the Planning Act. Notice of collection: the personal information collected as a result of the public meetings are collected under the authority of the Planning Act and will be used to assist in making a decision on this matter. Persons speaking at the meeting are requested to give their name and address for recording in the minutes. All names, addresses, opinions, and comments may be collected and may form part of the minutes, which will be available to the public. Additionally, interested members of the public can email the committee clerk or the assigned planner if they wish to be notified regarding a particular application. Questions regarding this collection should be forwarded to the Director of Planning Services. And I believe we will put that address, email address up at some point this evening. All 3 of the agenda items tonight are public meeting reports, which constitutes the first portion of every one of our meetings. So the first portion of tonight's meeting is to present planning applications in a public forum as detailed in the public meeting reports. These reports do not contain a staff recommendation, and therefore no decisions will be made this evening. And I think it's really important to underscore that no decisions are being made tonight. Following presentations by the applicant, the meeting will be open to the public for comments and questions, and then we'll have a chance for councillors to ask their questions as well. I think, does that cover it all? I think it does. And so our first public meeting tonight is 830 Gardner's Road. So I will ask our planner on that file to comment on the public notice, and then we will turn it over to the applicant. Mr. Peggi.
Yes, good evening, everybody. Thank you through Mr. Vice Chair. So as you stated, this is a statutory public meeting held under the Planning Act for a zoning bylaw amendment application for 820 and 830 Gardner's Road. As part of this public meeting, planning staff have prepared a public meeting report summarizing the proposal. And as you've stated, there are no recommendations or decisions that are being made this evening regarding this report. Notice was given in accordance with the Planning Act as detailed in the report. Staff have received 4 pieces of public correspondence, all of which have been shared with the applicant and with Planning Committee. Planning staff are in attendance this evening to record the questions being asked of the applicant and to address technical questions regarding the planning process. The questions asked by the public and Planning Committee, along with any written submissions, will be addressed by planning staff within a comprehensive report after the technical review and assessment of the proposal by the city has been completed. Staff will bring a comprehensive report with recommendations back to Planning Committee at a future date.
Thank you. So our first applicant, I'm not sure who's speaking to this one.
Good evening.
Mr. Tao.
Yes,
Good evening, Mr. Tao. Floor is yours.
Thank you. So for those who don't know you, my name is Mark Tao. I am a registered professional planner with IBI Group, and we are representing the owner and applicant, which is 501 Frontenac Inc., for the subject zoning bylaw amendment application. Next slide, please. So the application for zoning bylaw amendment is to rezone the subject property from 2 site-specific zones, an arterial commercial zone as well as a residential zone, to a single site-specific residential zone. And the purpose of the rezoning is to enable an apartment building as well as 7 townhouse blocks within the site, and to be a private condominium road and condo blocks as part of a future application. Next slide, please. So the subject property is located north of Taylor Kidd Boulevard on the west side of Gardner's Road. This image shows nearby major landmarks, including Walkways Center, approximately 400 meters to the northwest, and then the Ryokan Center to the south, as well as a number of other retail plazas along the Gardner's Road corridor. And next slide, please. This shows a view looking north. The subject lands in the middle. So you can see there's a residential neighborhood to the immediate north as well as to the southwest or southeast. There's a new apartment building just south of the mall on the left-hand side near the number 2. And then there's further apartment buildings to the north along Gardner's Road and set back, which are accessed, some of which are accessed through the residential neighborhood to the north. And then Walkways Center Mall to the northwest, Lion Civic Gardens Park to the northwest as well. And next slide, please. So the subject property is about 2.5 hectares. So it's a large property, though very long, narrow, so 60 meters of frontage on Gardner's Road. And then there's a stub end off of Bingham Court at the eastern end of the property, which also provides access to the property. So that road was built out as part of that subdivision and essentially is a temporary dead end that provides a connection into this particular lot. And I already described the surrounding uses, so I'll skip over that. And next slide, please. The site, just in terms of context, is well serviced by both existing roads, primarily Gardner's Road, and also by pedestrian infrastructure along Gardner's Road, as well as a number of transit routes. There's one directly in front of the site, including a stop in front of the site. And then, of course, the major transit hub at the Walkways Center provides access to a number of routes that would take a rider throughout the city. Next slide, please. So the details of the proposal broadly are a total of 298 units are proposed, including an apartment building with 196 units, and then 7 separate blocks of stacked townhouses with 102 units. It's proposed to be a range of unit sizes. The tenure is proposed to be condominium in this particular case. Part of that is because it allows for the creation of a condo road through the site and private maintenance of that road, as well as common park and amenity areas. Parking ratio for the apartment is 1.09 spaces per unit. And then the stacked townhouses have what I'll call like a baseline of 1 space per unit. And then about half of the units also have a second tandem space similar to a traditional townhouse unit for parking in front of the garage space. There's a significant amount of green space and amenity area within the development. All the townhouse blocks have their own kind of rear yard amenity area, a landscaped open space, as well as some green space around each of those blocks. And then the apartment building has its own amenity courtyard, as well as a separate common outdoor area with a clubhouse and a pool. And then there's also normal amenities associated with the apartment building, including balconies, terrace, and then internal common spaces like a gym, library, cinema, movie room. Next slide, please. So the site, I've broken it up here in just essentially 3 different components just to explain the 3 building types. So the primary difference is apartment building, which is on the left-hand side outlined in yellow. And then the other building form is 2 types of stacked townhouses. One type that's 3 stories tall with 2 units per stack, if you will. And then the other type which is outlined in blue, is a 3.5 story. and that has 3 units per stack. So similar to a development that was recently constructed on Development Drive. There's some, if you've driven down there recently, you'll see there's a new stacked townhouse development near the western edge of Development Drive, just outside the industrial park next to the clinic out there. So similar development to that. So next slide, please. So the apartment block is proposed to be primarily 6 stories, but it does step down to 3, minimum of 3 and 4 stories at the northeast corner, where it's abutting the residential neighborhood to the north. So this is to provide greater separation at the taller building heights to that residential neighborhood, and to provide reduced shadowing in that area as well. The goal was to not have shadowing off-site from the building in those rear yards from the March to September time periods through the summer. The development has primarily within the apartment building, there's some surface parking, primarily envisioned to be a limited number of visitor parking outside in the front yard. And then there's some parking you can see here that's accessed just off the private road. And then the majority of the parking is going to be underground and within the structure in a portion of the first floor. So next slide, please. So this shows the ground floor. So there'll be some residential units and amenity at grade near the front, but the primary use of the ground floor is going to be structured parking. Next slide, please. And then on the 2nd through 6th floors, it's residential units throughout. Again, just a mix of studio up to 3-bedroom units is anticipated. Next slide, please. So this image just shows the stepping down of the apartment building at the northeast corner. So the closest the apartment building is to the neighborhood to the north is 7.5 meters. And at that point, the building's been stepped down to 3 stories, which is similar to the zoning that would be in place in the neighborhood to the north in terms of allowing a 2.5, 3-story townhouse dwelling. So we're trying to provide a similar built form or similar built form height at that point. So that's certainly in terms of sensitive surrounding land uses. To the south, there's a automotive use. It's I believe it's a Nissan dealer now. So not terribly sensitive in terms of impacts from this building on that use. At the northeast corner where the building, northwest corner where the building comes close to the north property line, there's a commercial plaza. So again, not terribly sensitive in terms of potential impacts on that use. It's really at this northeast corner where the U comes back around and comes close to that neighborhood is where we wanted to make sure the building was stepped down to provide some greater reduction in shadowing impacts, as well as less overlook opportunities. So there are, on that face of the building that points north or faces north, there are a total of 4 units at the 2nd and 3rd floor that would face that way. So 4 units, 8 windows, essentially facing north at that point towards that neighborhood. The ground floor is it's just an enclosed parking structure, so no uses on the ground floor that would look out to that neighbor. Next slide, please. So the next built form is the 3-unit type stacked townhouse. So this is the one that's similar to what is on Development Drive, recently completed. So there's a unit in the basement, and then a unit on the main floor, and then a unit on the 2nd and 3rd floors, or 3rd and 4th levels, sorry. And so these have porches around the front and as well as in the back. So each of the units would have either amenity space on the porches or in the rear yards. And there's also a small rooftop amenity area for the upper units. Next slide, please. And then this is the 2nd type of stacked townhouse unit. This is a 2-unit stacked townhouse. So there's a unit on the main and 2nd floor, and then a unit on the upper floor. And there's a garage for each of the 2 units in each of the stacks, if you will. And then there's also a theoretically an overflow or tandem parking space in a driveway in front of each of those garages. Next slide, please. So a number of supporting studies were completed as part of the complete zoning bylaw amendment application. These included urban design, traffic, noise, tree inventory, planning report, and serviceability reports. And this project will be subject to a site plan control application as a next step. And then if and when that site plan application is approved, it would be subject to a plan of condominium application as well. Next slide, please. So we assess the application with respect to the PPS, and as is a underutilized well-serviced urban lot on a major road at the edge of a residential neighborhood, and that makes use of existing land and resources, and is compatible with adjacent uses. We are of the opinion that it does meet the test of being consistent with the provincial policy statement. And next slide, please. With respect to the official plan, it's a split designated lot. So the front portion, an approximate third of the front portion of the site next to Gardner's Road, is in the arterial commercial designation. And then the rear approximate 2/3 is in the residential designation. The arterial commercial designation does permit high density residential where the site is underutilized and where other tests are met in terms of access to park space, adjacency to existing neighborhoods, et cetera. So in our view, the applicant or the application does meet those tests for residential within the arterial commercial designation. So an official plan amendment is not required in this case. Next slide, please. So the number of policies related to both high density residential and, as I said, arterial commercial in terms of tests for where high density residential can be located, how it should be designed, proximity to parks and open space, amenities, walking distance to commercial uses, proximity to transit, active transportation linkages, et cetera. And so the site and the proposed development satisfies those various tests. Next slide, please. And then in terms of other tests in the official plan with respect to compatibility, mitigation measures, functional needs, intensification, urban design, we assessed those policies as well, and the site through various measures implements mitigation measures where necessary to reduce or manage impacts off site, particularly for the residential adjacent to the north. And also satisfies the other residential intensification policies of the official plan. So in conclusion, the zoning bylaw amendment, in our opinion, conforms to the official plan. Next slide, please. So zoning is currently, as I said before, split zoned, primarily the arterial commercial and residential. There's also a small portion of the property at the rear that you can see as a little bit of a triangle shape next to where it says OS3 on the zoning map. So that's part of the subject property. It's currently vegetated, trees, other undergrowth there. It's in an OS zone. It's the same as the matching hydro corridor that traverses the site to the east. So that area is proposed to remain undisturbed. The existing vegetation would remain and essentially be essentially green space buffer and form part of the rear yard of the townhouses on the eastern side of the site. So the property is not included in the new zoning bylaw, though it is subject to a holding zone removal requirement, which would be met through this application in terms of the supporting studies to allow development. It's anticipated that if approved, the subject site would be imported into the new zoning bylaw and subject to one of the new urban residential zones, potentially URM 6. So that's something that we expect would come out as part of the zoning review once the new zoning bylaw comes into effect after the appeal period. There is, just on that note, there is a couple of zones that match very closely to what's being proposed in terms of minimum and maximum performance provisions for height, density, setbacks, et cetera. Next slide, please. So there are a number of areas where relief is required, and part of that is really just to address the need to add a townhouse as a permitted use in this zone. It's really a higher density zone that would allow apartment buildings and doesn't include stacked townhouses as a type of use. And indeed, stacked townhouses are a fairly modern or new type of built form that isn't permitted as of right in any zone. So the R5 zone needs to be modified to include permissions for a stacked townhouse and then establish specific provisions governing the size, setback, et cetera, of a stacked townhouse unit. There are modest reductions required for some of the north side yard. The most notable one, I would say, is next to the residential neighborhood to the south. The side yard between the apartment building and the residential neighborhood to the south is proposed to be reduced. Though that really is primarily a function of the fact that the side yard is supposed to be a setback based on the half the height of the building, and because we're stepping the building down at that point where it's closest, the intention is that we would mitigate the impacts of the taller building by the fact that we've stepped the building down to be actually less tall in that location. We're proposing to reduce the parking ratio from 1.25, which is the current old zoning bylaw standard, to 1.0, which is the new zoning bylaw standard for this area. Reduce the parking space dimensions, again, to match what the new zoning bylaw was anticipating for parking space sizes. Allowing a limited number of parking spaces in the front yard, which is primarily for visitor parking. And then, as I said, establishing some maximum height provisions for the townhouses for this particular zone. So overall, the justification and the rationale for these reductions is that it does implement the OP policies, been designed to be compatible and to implement mitigation measures where needed. It provides for a mix of housing, including apartment building at the front along Gardner's Road, where you do anticipate a bigger built form, a more intense type of development like some of the other apartment buildings along Gardner's Road, and then having a more ground-oriented townhouse type development in the rear, where it's next to the existing residential neighborhood. So providing that transition of taller and more dense up at the main road to a less dense and smaller ground-oriented type of development in the rear, where it's next to or more directly next to the neighborhoods. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, we're of the opinion that the application is consistent with the PPS, it conforms to the official plan, is compatible with the surrounding land use, and represents good planning and is in the public interest. So as was noted, this is simply the public meeting, so happy to field any questions and receive any comments as you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Tao. And Madam Clerk, I wonder if you could just explain to the public the process for asking questions, and then we will turn to the public for comment.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, and through you, I will note that we do have 20 members of the public with us at this time. So if there's anyone wishing to speak to the current application, you will need to raise your hand in Zoom. This is located in the center of the Zoom window when you move your mouse over the screen. For those who are joining us via phone, you will need to press *9 in order to raise your hand to indicate that you would like to speak. Mr. Vice Chair, I'm just going to give them a second here to see if we get any hands.
And just while you're doing that, just a reminder to folks as well that we're here to speak about land use and not about people planning. So although we can talk about the buildings, the compatibility, the density, those kinds of issues, we don't talk in this file or other files that we're going to be looking at tonight about the people or the tenants who will be inhabiting the buildings when they're done. And I will call you out of order if the question goes to that. So Madam Clerk, do we have any?
We do, Mr. Vice Chair. Just before we go to our first speaker, just a note for those who are participating that we will collect all of the comments at once. You will have 5 minutes to present those comments, and then the applicant will provide a response once we've received all of the comments from the members of the public. So the first to speak, Mr. Vice Chair, is Victoria Dyson.
So Ms. Dyson, if you could state your name and your address, and just to reaffirm, you have 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you. Victoria Dyson. And I live on actually Whistler Terrace, so my backyard is looking onto this this property. I'm at 566 Whistler Terrace. So I have two questions. One question is, when is the proposed start date? And like how long is this intended to take? The second question I have too is there going to be any sort of trees planted between our back fences and the proposed buildings behind us? That's all. Thanks.
Thanks, Mrs. Dyson. We're going to collect all the questions together at the same time, and then we'll have the applicants respond once we've got all the questions. Is there another person?
Mr. Vice Chair, next to speak is Carol Wyman.
Ms. Wyman, if you could state your name and full name and address, and then the floor is yours. Ms. Wyman, you're on mute, I think, maybe.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, there we go.
Yeah,
Now we can
there we
hear
go.
you. Yeah.
Yes, we can.
I didn't have it plugged in enough. Thank you. I live at 1037 McCallum Lane in Sydenham, previously a resident of Kingston, and I worked in Kingston. I'm calling to make an appeal on behalf of all the bowlers who live in Kingston, Sydenham, Napanee, and many areas around this to try and retain this bowling alley. There's only 2 10-pin bowling alleys in Kingston, and this one is, of course, the very best of the 2. It's used also by the schools. They bring their students there for their recreation. And nowadays, there's so much more interest in increased recreation, and so more and more people are more interested in getting to bowl or other activities. As well, it could be an advantage to all these new residents that are going to be in the apartments who may also like to use this 10-pin bowling alley. So basically, I'm making an appeal on behalf of all the bowlers that somehow could we retain this bowling alley. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wyman. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone else in the queue?
Mr. Vice Chair, there are no further hands.
All right, so we'll go to the applicant for an opportunity to respond.
So thank you to those who spoke. So with respect to the question from Ms. Dyson, in terms of proposed start date and construction length, I would anticipate that the approvals process for this should eventually be approved. It would certainly take 12 plus months from today to get through zoning bylaw amendment, site plan approval, final plan of condo, and then construction. Project of this nature is probably 18 months thereabouts. It may be broken up into 2 phases. First the apartment building and then the townhouses in behind, but not clear at this point. Depends on the uptake and the demand for the housing at that time, if and when approval is given. So, and then with respect to trees or landscaping, yes, so there would be a comprehensive replanting and re-landscaping plan. As I noted earlier, the trees that currently exist at the rear of the property next to the hydro corridor are anticipated to be retained. It's not an area that's to be disturbed for as part of the development. And then we would be intending on replanting or planting more trees as part of the redevelopment itself. There's about landscaped open space in the property is just over 40%. So there's quite a bit of green space that's going to be, I guess, created on the site, which is primarily parking and gravel currently. So certainly, hopefully there would be a good opportunity to add more greenery to the site. And then any fencing that doesn't exist, I would anticipate that the whole site would be fenced as well as part of the development. So if there isn't fences currently in place along rear property lines, those would be erected as part of the development. And then with respect to the second question about retaining the bowling alley, yeah, I bowled there myself, so it's It's surprising that Kingston only has, I guess, 2, and we'd be down to 1. So I'm not sure if there's a market for another bowling alley in the location. The owner, I did speak with the owner about this because we had seen this comment come through, and the intention is to leave the building up and operating as a bowling alley until demolition when development is imminent. So the intention isn't that the bowling alley would be demolished prematurely or before it needs to be. So that's some consolation, or if there's alternative locations that they might move to, it maybe gives them some time to look for those alternate locations in the meantime.
Thank you. So now I'll turn to our committee if anyone has questions. Looking at Councillor Sanich.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. My only question is, thanks, Mr. Tao, for your presentation. Thanks very much for saving the open space as is in that triangle on the far east side. Since it's going to be the townhomes backing onto that, will they be fenced? That's my only question.
Mr. Tao?
Yeah, good question. I don't know if that would be fenced in the rear there. It's abutting the hydro corridor at that point, so I'm not sure if there's a existing cage wire fence there or not. So that's a good question, but I'm not sure. My sense is that it would remain open to the rear of the vegetation, but it'd be a site plan detail to be confirmed, I guess.
Yeah. Just to follow up with that, if it's not fenced, then what usually happens is that the homeowners, over the years decide that it's their space, and then they go in and they start clearing that vegetation, to do a shed, and there's no control, right? There's no police that goes around and says, hey, this was open space. So for staff for the minutes, if there could be a fence, then that will just keep that open space as open space instead of people claiming that it's an extension of their backyard and doing what they like with it, which is what usually seems to happen if there isn't a fence. Thanks. And then Mr. Tao, I guess you saw in the edits, there's the concern, sort of what our first resident had said too, that if a white cedar hedge could be placed along where is it the terrace, right? Is it a Whistler Terrace, right? If like a white cedar hedge could maybe be put along there, so to give privacy from the existing homes to this new development. Thank you.
Good question. And if I may, just in follow up, I understand the first question a little bit better in terms of the concern. So I guess what might prevent a future owner from removing the vegetation is that it would be subject to site plan control, and it would be part of the condominium corporation as well. So the vegetation that's there now would be shown in the site plan agreement as being retained. So it wouldn't be the same as if it were entirely private backyard that somebody would have total control over. It would be controlled in a couple of ways in terms of managing whether or not vegetation could be removed in the future.
Thank you. Councillor Sanich, are you finished? Are there any other questions from committee members? I'm not seeing any. I do see Ms. Wyman's hand up again. Just for clarification, members of the public are only allowed to speak to the file once. However, if you have other questions or concerns or issues, you can include them in correspondence to the clerk, as I mentioned earlier, and they will be taken into consideration by the applicant and by our own planners. All right, so seeing no other questions, then I will call this public meeting to a close, and we'll move on to our next one, which is, excuse me, I just got to go down to it now. I don't have a very good What page am I on, Madam Clerk? Do you know?
Mr. Vice Chair, we should be on page 5 of the agenda. This is the public meeting for 235-247 Portsmouth Avenue.
There we
and
go.
Mr. Peggy is available to introduce the matter.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Sorry about that. Mr. Peggy?
All right, hello again. Through you, Mr. Vice Chair. This is a statutory public meeting held under the Planning Act for a zoning bylaw amendment application for 235 and 247 Portsmouth Avenue. The purpose of the public meeting is for the applicant to present their proposal to the public and planning committee and to respond to questions regarding the proposal. Should be noted again that no recommendations or decisions are being made this evening regarding this report. As part of the public meeting, staff have prepared a public meeting report summarizing the proposal, which has been made available. Notice was given in accordance with the Planning Act as detailed in that report. Staff have received 11 pieces of public correspondence, all of which have been shared with the applicant and with Planning Committee and been added to the file. Planning staff are in attendance to record the questions being asked of the applicant and to address technical questions regarding the planning process, questions asked by the public and planning committee, along with any written submissions will be addressed by staff in a comprehensive report. After the technical review and assessment of the proposal by the city has been completed, planning staff will bring the comprehensive report with recommendations back to planning committee at a future date. Thank you.
Thank you. So Mr. Benchkowski, if I have that correct, are you speaking on behalf of the applicant?
I am.
All right, the floor is yours.
Good evening, everybody. So to introduce the proposal, this is a proposed residential development with the consolidation of 2 lots, the 2 lots being 235 and 247 Portsmouth Avenue. They are held under the same ownership right now. They are held under different ownership right now. So they are not consolidated as one, but again, it is 2 numbered companies that are owned by the same individual. If we can go to the next slide, please. The existing property itself has a split zoning, with 235 being zoned A1, which is the southern portion, and 247 being zoned A1.415. This is somewhat of an odd shaped lot. If we look on the left side of the screen where we see the proposed site plan, we see a kind of, I want to call it a finger that possibly is extending into the rear portion. That area there does extend into the established residential neighborhood to the east. There is no proposal being offered at that portion right there today. So the application proposes to rezone this site to a site-specific B3 zoning bylaw under 8499 and a site-specific URM7 under the new zoning bylaw 2022-62. So to quickly review the highlights of the proposal, Portsmouth is a collector road that does have density located along it of a higher nature. To the south, we have the medical center, and across the street, we do have a mixture of commercial as well as residential uses, as well as further to the west, some higher rise residential rental apartment buildings. The proposal is for a 4-story rental dwelling with 63 units in total. Those units would be broken down to be 12 bachelor units, 11 one-bedroom units, 27 two-bedroom units, and 13 three-bedroom units. Those units are appropriated within those 4 floors, as well as there are units proposed within the basement, which is largely located on the interior courtyard. If we could zoom in on the left slide, please. I seem to have lost the slide. Yes, thank you. The basement units are concentrated within that middle amenity space there. Bicycle parking is located below grade, as well as storage lockers, laundry facilities, and mechanical rooms. The appropriateness of this development, in my opinion, from a planning perspective, is the location of it along Portsmouth Avenue, the appropriate setbacks to the residential rear yard to the north, as well as the appropriate residential setbacks to the properties to the east. We can go to the next slide, please. I've submitted a series of snapshot elevations. And if we could play the top left one, please zoom in on that. I've taken the available data from the city of Kingston and overlaid this development within that. This does scale perfectly as to where it would fit in relation to those dwellings. So if we see here, the dwelling located to the north actually fronts onto Dickens. Now that portion there has a rear yard setback with very little amenity space that faces the proposed development's parking area, which is located on the north side. That dwelling's the larger portion of that dwelling's amenity space is actually located on what would be considered a side yard that wraps around the adjacent property to the north on Portsmouth and offers that amenity space on Portsmouth. If we look to the rear, again, we see an appropriate separation between the established residential to the rear and to the south, that is the institutional building that is located there. We have located the parking along that north portion to mitigate any impact of shadowing or overlook into the residential area located to the north. We could continue down, please. Here we see a view looking from the south, again, looking northwest in this instance. Again, the appropriate regard and separation from those established residential dwellings. That kind of finger that extends out there really limits any developability, which again, helps to create that appropriate separation. Now, if we go to the next slide, please. A transportation impact study was prepared by Nextrend and submitted in support of the application. It spoke to the transportation planning context in the area in terms of the close proximity of St. Lawrence College, as well as Queen's University. It was the conclusion that 25 parking spaces in this instance is appropriate given the location and the intent of this being a residential rental building. In support of the application, an arborist report was submitted, an archaeological assessment was submitted, as well as a draft zoning bylaw amendment, an erosion sediment and control plan, a functional servicing report, as well as a noise report, a planning justification, as well as pre and post development drainage plans, as well as site servicing, and the aforementioned transportation impact study. It's my opinion from a planning point of view, given the context of this being located on a collector road, this density and the proposal for a 4-story dwelling is appropriate, and in my opinion, represents good planning. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Benchkowski. And Madam Clerk, do we have anybody in the queue?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, and through you, we do have a number of hands up. Just a reminder to those who are here tonight, if you'd like to speak to the current application, we do require you to raise your hand in Zoom by using the raise hand function in the center of the Zoom window. This will place you on a speakers list. So, Mr. Vice Chair, we're going to start with Michael Jakob.
And just for your information, we're going to do 5 speakers, and then we will ask the applicant to respond once the first 5 are done, and then we'll go on to the next 5. Mr. Jakob, the floor is yours.
Yeah.
Your name and address first, please.
Yeah, it's Dr. Mike Jakob, 3 Authors Lane. You guys can hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. So Authors Lane is you saw in your development plan there, that number 4 and 2, that little knuckle of grass is going right up against our property. We pay probably the highest property tax in the city to live on Authors Lane. We're in a dense area. I know because my friends have waterfront properties and they pay less than we do in property tax. You're about to raise a 4-story building that looks right into the neighborhood. It completely defeats all the privacy. And that little knuckle of grass there is not insignificant. There's a dense amount of trees in that area. And I want to know what you're going to do with those trees. If you're going to cut them down, you're going to basically dissolve our property value, because we lose all our privacy, and we lose a substantial amount of equity in that. So I need to know what's going to happen to those trees in that area.
Mr. Jakob, just so you know, you have to give your full statement, and then the respondent will respond to all the questions after the first 5 people. So if that's all that you had to ask, then we'll move on to the next one. I just want to make sure you got everything in.
Yeah, nothing further.
All right, thank you very much. And our next speaker, Madam Clerk.
Mr. Vice Chair, next to speak is Michael Whitley, followed by Carol Clapperton.
Mr. Whitley, your name and address, and then the floor is yours.
Hi, my name's Neil Whitley, 295 Portsmouth Avenue, and good evening, everyone. And thank you, councillors, for your participation. It's obviously long and tedious work that you guys do, and I appreciate it. Anyways, back to the subject. The study that they did about traffic, I have doubts about. To start with, the number of parking spaces for a 66 unit building, including 3-bedroom apartments at 23 is ridiculous. If you know Portsmouth, you know that there is no parking on the street. People are renting and they have so many cars, they're parking on their lawns, they're paving their backyards for parking. And it works out, because it's students basically, that it's about 1 car per room in these houses. Like my neighbors have 3 bedrooms, they have 4 cars in the driveway. Plus, to create these spaces, we already have a tremendous flooding.
Mr. Whitley, we're losing you there a little bit. Did you move away from your mic?
Okay, is this better? We have a tremendous sewer flooding problem in this area. Particularly this year, it's got even worse, where all our lots have been flooded and our basements. So you're paving over more land to create these parking spaces, which would normally absorb rainfall. You got too few parking spaces. It's totally unrealistic. They're talking about this street, being an area with amenities. No, there aren't. You have to go quite a distance to find a grocery store, drugstore, or anything. That means people have to drive. They don't have an alternative, really. Obviously, you're not catering totally to students if you have 3-bedroom units, I don't think. Anyways, the traffic in this area is already ridiculous. They're backed up. If you go south on Portsmouth, when you get to Johnson, there's a left turn lane. Well, people are backed up so far, they're going into the opposite traffic lane to turn left. And this is extremely dangerous. And there's accidents all the time at this intersection. Queen Mary Road is meant to be a traffic calming area where they put in speed bumps, tried to stop people using it as a through road to Bath Road. That's already been negated by the increase in traffic already, without adding this 66 units with their cars. Plus, next door, they're putting in a proposal for a 17 unit building. So there you got 83 units that are going to be pumping cars into an already congested, flooded intersection. I think that this study needs to be looked at, this traffic study. Definitely, what are they going to do about the sewer infrastructure to handle this building when we're already flooded out where I'm living, which is only like 4 houses down from this? So those are my questions.
Thanks, Mr. Whitley.
Thank you.
Next on the list, Madam Clerk.
Mr. Vice Chair, next is Carol Clapperton.
Ms. Clapperton, if you could give us your name and address, and then the floor is yours.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Carol Clapperton. I live at 107 Dickens Drive. I live almost kitty corner from the house that borders on the parking lot of this proposed development. One house, kitty corner and down one house. I'm very concerned about the scale and size of the plans, as well as the traffic noise and lack of green space the apartment would have. I have outlined my concerns in a letter to the planning board and council members. I'm not going to repeat all of the issues I wrote about there. Instead, I want to talk about the proposed plan from a health, livability, and community perspective. We've all been through the COVID pandemic in the last 2 years and have learned a lot. What many of us have found is that we need to have green space around us for our health. Those of us who live in the Woodlands area, this area, have been fortunate to have backyards and quiet streets to walk, to relax, and to garden and enjoy our homes. We know that trees, green space, and quiet and good air factor into our well-being. When people do not have these things, it leads to stress, anxiety, and feelings of helplessness. This apartment building, should it proceed as planned, would undermine the health and livability of our area. It may erode the neighborhood and lead to more noise, traffic, and lack of respect for the peace of others. This building is entirely too big. It actually looks like a building that might have been designed for another locale, as it has little room for snow removal, parking, or outdoor space for the tenants to enjoy any green space. In fact, the proposal does not allow for any trees that I can see around the building or any consideration for the livability for the tenants and those in the area. In my opinion, the building of 63 apartments with 25 parking spaces seems to maximize the site in service of greed. Why else would a building of this size be proposed? Is greed what we want to support in this city, or is having a community that enhances the lives of citizens the goal? I hope it's the latter. I can envision a building that would be much more appropriate and aesthetically pleasing. It would have ample parking, a circular type driveway for easy deliveries, space for snow removal, garbage bin and recycle pickups, as well as some green space for the tenants to enjoy a barbecue or sitting out on a summer day. There are a couple of recent apartments that have been constructed in Kingston. The building at the corner of Portsmouth Avenue and King Street is attractive. It's 3 stories high and does not detract from the homes in the area. Another newer building between Macdonell and Toronto Street on Johnson Street is another example of good design, and it fits with the surroundings. I understand we need to have more housing in Kingston, but please do not allow what is already here in the area to be degraded due to a development that seems focused on making money rather than the health, outdoor space, and manageable traffic and noise in this area. I know the planning committee has a tough job ahead, and I want to thank you in advance for looking at the project in terms of its overall effect on the area. And I trust that you will do your job conscientiously and with integrity. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Clapperton. Madam Clerk, our next speaker.
Mr. Vice Chair, next to speak is Nicole Florent, followed by Lucille Davies.
Ms. Florent, your name and address, and then the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nicole Florent, and I live at 1098 King Street West. I just have a few brief comments about the proposal. One is I'm wondering about the percentage of greenery to building. In other words, the footprint. There doesn't seem to be a lot of green in that plan. Two is with regards to parking. I see that, well, depending on which document you read, 66 units and 23 or 25 parking spaces. That is missing out on the other 40 some people. Where are they going to park? And I know from having friends in the area that even as things are now with the daycare or the Montessori school rather at the corner, people are already parking on Dickens Drive and other streets in the city. And this would only make it a lot worse. The other thing I note is the entire size and height of the building. I think it's much too big for that small double property. Looking at that, I would be looking for a 2 or 3 story building. If you consider that there are parking spots on the side and the back, as well as balconies or windows off of that building, which means that people who are near or at the back would hear car doors slamming, people talking, car fobs beeping or honking when residents lock their cars, gas fumes, and so on. And not to mention people peering into the windows of their houses. And to quote a famous man, we shouldn't be in the bedrooms of the people of the nation through this proximity. I think those are my comments.
Thank you, Ms. Ron. Our next speaker, Ms. Davies, if you could state your name and address, and the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you. My name is Lucille Davies. My husband, Peter Davies, and I live at 100 Dickens Drive. We are 3 houses up from the house abutting the north end of the property. I have a few slides to illustrate a few points that I wrote in a submission. Here, no. If someone could, oh yeah. So next slide, please. So this is just like the diagram that developer showed. You can see it stretches to the extreme edges of the property. The front of the building is only 4 meters from the sidewalk. If you were standing on the sidewalk, you can hear all the conversations in the apartments. There's no privacy for even the tenants. And next slide, please. This is the parking lot, which is so out of proportion to the size of the building. The building has 63 units and 166 bedrooms. So if you're looking at tenants who are sharing an apartment, 3-bedroom or 2-bedroom, you could have up to 160 tenants living in there with 24 parking spaces, 1 handicap parking. That is a ratio of 0.2 of parking spot. That is for every 10 people, only 2 people can have a parking spot. There's no parking for guests or visitors. And one thing is the narrowness of this driveway. There are 2 parking spots at the end. So the width is 2 car widths. That is barely 1 car length. So if you are parked in there, you can barely make it out of the driveway. I have been noticing parking lots in Farm Boy and Lockless everywhere is more than 3 car widths. The other thing is there's only 1 entrance and exit point. So any car coming in not having a parking space to turn around in will have to reverse out onto the very busy Portsmouth Avenue. This exit is only a few houses down from the intersection. When there's a red light there, the cars are backed up all the way back. Buses, trucks, everything. So it's a nightmare to be backing out. If you are a taxi or a pizza delivery or delivering parcels, FedEx, UPS, or an ambulance, there's barely room for you to get in, and then you have to back out. I think that is just totally unsuitable. To think that if you provide fewer parking spots, people will turn to car sharing or bicycling. If only that were true, we could solve a lot of our pollution problems. We just remove parking lots. So next slide, please. So I walk along Portsmouth there at least 4 times a day because I walk from my house to the senior center for classes. And 2 Fridays ago, decided to take a picture. Here's the parking lot of the health unit. You might think that it's a huge parking lot. Some people can maybe park in there, or guest a visitor park there for a few hours. That parking lot is parked full from morning to when everyone goes home. There's not enough parking just for the staff, let alone the visitors. In fact, the staff park on Arthur's Lane and Dickens Drive. If you look on the map, there's no path to Arthur's Lane, but they have walked through the bushes and trees, a little shortcut through the grass. So people park there and then walk to work at the health unit. The other side streets all around that area are full of St. Lawrence College students who don't want to pay for parking in the St. Lawrence parking lot. I think it's a myth that students ride bikes all the time. They have cars. They each own a car. And next slide, please. This is
Ms. Davies, just to interrupt for a second, you have 30 seconds left.
Oh, well, I'll go to my last point, please. This lot is already rezoned for communal supported living. That is for senior residents. If you look, it is not just residential. It has a special designation L9, which is for a program similar to the Oasis program at Bowling Greens. It will be a smaller 16-unit building with facilities for rec room, exercise, dining, and so on.
Ms. Davies, I'm sorry, but I have to cut you off there. Just in terms of fairness, we only allocate 5 minutes per speaker. So I will now ask, turn it back over to the applicant to respond to the first 5 questions, and then we'll go to their next list of speakers.
Yes, thank you for those comments. I'm going to kind of group them together into a couple of themes. The first one would deal with the question regarding the trees from the first speaker. I believe it was Mr. Yacoub to the rear. At this point, we would have no reason to want to demolish or to remove those trees. Kind of in, I called it a finger, he called it a knuckle, that portion to the rear. And this would deal with some of the other questions also. At this time, a landscaping plan hasn't been submitted. If this were to move forward through the zoning process, that would be dealt with through the site plan approval application, where a consolidated landscape plan would be based upon that final proposal, which would involve the planting of trees as well as exterior amenity in terms of benches and things like that. In terms of dealing with the transportation issue, there is a new zoning bylaw that will be coming into effect that further reduces the requirement for parking. That has been addressed in our TIS report that has been submitted. And yes, this is located within close proximity to St. Lawrence. And the idea would be to try and market this as student housing, therefore reducing that automobile dependency, increasing the walkability to a place like the local college. In terms of drainage, both a pre and a post drainage plan have been submitted. Again, all rainwater or any type of water generated on this property would have to be demonstrated that it can be contained within this property, and there be no runoff onto either adjacent properties to the north, south, or to the east. I believe the fourth speaker was speaking to the green area. There's approximately 41% of the property of the proposal would be green area or proposed to be permeable through some type of landscape vegetation without it being hardscape. In addition, the building itself would have to be able to retain all of that rainwater on the property as well. To deal with the access, it is a 6-meter drive aisle that is being proposed internally on the site. That is typical for a two-way drive aisle. Lastly, I think it's important, some of the questions that came up with the appropriateness of a development like this in relation to the neighborhood. I think from a planning perspective, we kind of have two things fighting against us. We have the established residential neighborhood located to the rear with Portsmouth itself, this wouldn't be an appropriate development had it been on the interior of that established neighborhood, which is essentially single-family dwellings. When we look at the context of Portsmouth, the appropriateness of a 4-story building, that is on the streetscape, that presents itself with the idea of eyes on the street, of having people look onto Portsmouth, really is a development pattern we should be promoting along streets like this that have a higher traffic count as well as pedestrian walkability. And I think that pretty much answers the questions. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Benchkowski. So, Madam Clerk, our next speaker.
Mr. Vice Chair, through you, next to speak is Catherine Rambo, followed by Edward Schoen.
Ms. Rambo, your name and address, and the floor is yours.
Hi, yes, thank you. My name is Catherine Ramba. I live at 36 Copperfield Drive. And I did want to thank the Planning Committee for their time and consideration. It's really appreciated. I do have a few questions and comments. I did have a question about that thin strip to the east of the site, but I guess that hasn't been decided in the proposal. I'm also wondering where all the garbage and compost and recycling would be handled. It sounds like we could have a number of people, even beyond the number of units, and this could be a large amount to handle. I'm also wondering if there's any affordable housing here. And by affordable, I really mean the true affordable housing, not something that's following the market value or is considered more affordable because it's a smaller unit than another unit. Something that's really affordable in the sense that it's available below market rates for people. I did write a letter opposing this application for a number of reasons. I do think the building's quite out of scale to the northwest, east, and south, including on Portsmouth. And I think the high density rental building is really quite out of context for this area. And again, not just for the neighborhood behind. And I did think increased traffic would be an issue, privacy an issue for neighbors, and also the increase of noise. The last thing I wanted to say, it's really a concern, and again, it's about water, which has been such a problem for many people in this area. I think the application says that permeable pavers are to be used for parking. I hope I have that right. And I thought, well, this is good. This is better than non-permeable pavement for handling water. But I know that permeable pavers, they allow water to move through them, but they don't absorb water, as far as I know. So I was thinking if flooding is an issue for neighbors or for people in this area, then I thought, you know, if we've got compacted soil or limestone underneath the permeable pavers, this could still be an issue. So, and also I just wanted to point out, as I did in my letter, that really the best way to absorb water, or one of the best ways, is into healthy soil. And healthy soil has plants and trees and living roots in it. So I just wanted to mention that again. It's just a comment. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Ramba. Mr. Chown, you're next. So if you'd state your name and address, and the floor will be yours. Go ahead, Mr. Chown. I think we can hear you.
Okay, you can. Good. I am the next door neighbor, so I have some concerns.
So, Mr. Chown, sorry, could you give us your name?
19 Dickens Drive. I'm sorry, I wasn't.
No problem. Thank you.
A lot of points have been covered that I've, which I've put in my written contribution. I will not repeat them. I am rather surprised that after the long process of city staff, councillors, and taxpayers to produce a plan, and this project bounces in immediately right off the plan. The 4 stories limit was at the end of Calderwood, as I understand it in the plan. The other thing that concerns me, and again concerns the city, is that this plan has no evident plan for waste disposal. There's no room for dumpsters, well, right off 2 parking places. And is there a plan, and do we have the right, as you in your committee have the right to ask an applicant to have a concrete recycling plan? Because there's no mention of this here. And as it stands, the waste would have to go out to the parking lot through a side door, which is the only place for deliveries to go in. And then, as I said, 2 parking places gone to dumpsters, maybe more if they have recycling. Take off a couple more parking places for snow removal, because we do have snow here. And I think you're going to end up with not 25 parking places, but 20 all-weather parking places. So that is a concern. As an immediate neighbor, and I think all of us who abut on the project, we're much concerned that the lack of parking will put parking onto the side streets. And then visitors, residents, how do you get to the place? Do you go all the way around? No, you cut across people's property. You can put up security fences. My experience in this area is they'll be quickly vandalized. There'll be a hole in them. And so that is a real concern for those of us neighboring on Authors Lane and on Dickens Drive. And the rest I have stated in my written proposition. I'll be quiet now.
Thank you, Mr. Chown. Appreciate it. Madam Clerk, our next speaker.
Mr. Vice Chair, through you, next to speak is Chris Galbraith, followed by Daniel Glad.
Mr. Galbraith, your name and address for the record, and then the floor is yours.
This is Chris Galbraith, and my wife is here as well, Lee Weatherall, 65 Dickens Drive.
Thank you.
I would like to echo concerns which we have, as several other speakers have mentioned, about shadowing and noise and the overlook problem that I think just building of this size has to involve. The graphics which we saw from the developer were very interesting in terms of the viewpoints, but what I think was missing from those was the fact that the adjacent buildings are largely bungalows in a lot of cases, or 1.5 story. And this building is going to come to dominate the landscape, I think, pretty significantly. For example, the health unit is a 3-unit building, or a 3-story building. Anguanada at street levels is a 1-story. The concerns that have been raised about parking, I think, can't be understated. We have got issues in our neighborhood already with people parking quite extensively in the area. The photographs that were shown of the health unit parking lot, that's absolutely spot on. Another concern which I have is that for the residents of this building who are seeking outdoor space, something to do on a nice day, there is greenery around, but it happens to be the Anguanada area, which is a reserved spot for developmental. There's parking or park space there, which is intended. So there are swings, there are sensory gardens and things like that. It is inconceivable that 116 people aren't going to find themselves on a nice day outside partying in those spaces. That strikes me as particularly. It's not a great use of that space by people who are going to be looking to get outside. And on the one hand, I look at that knuckle or the finger in the property, and on the one hand, it's great that it's going to be trees, but that makes it very difficult for people to get outdoors. And on the other hand, I'm terrified that if those trees are removed, there's going to be quite a bit of noise in people's backyards on Dickens Drive, because people will gravitate to any green space that they have. So if the trees stay, that's going to force people into the Anguanada space. And if those trees are removed, it's going to be in the backyards of our neighbors. So then I guess my biggest concern, as was just raised by somebody, is the fact that we've gone through this consultation, and this is in many ways a question for council. Having gone through this, on the very day that I received the results of that activity, which was to say that the 4 stories were limited south of Calderwood, I opened the very next envelope and we get this proposal where I have to ask the question, does this process mean anything to talk about rezoning if all we're going to do is immediately be forced back into a situation like this where we're having a meeting about rezoning exceptions? And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Galbraith. Mr. Glad, your name and address for the record, and then the floor is yours.
Hi, I'm Dr. Dan Glad. I live at 74 Dickens Drive. So many of the comments I was attempting to make have been made by my peers. The specific ones that I feel have been less mentioned until the last speaker. One question is around shadows from this property, given it's significantly higher than the surrounding properties, and there would be quite a loss of mature trees in the area. So I'm wondering if that has been part of the development plan, how shadows will affect the backyards of the adjacent properties. As has been noted by several people now, this is a much taller effective building than the other 2 properties on that side of the street, and would be used both during the day and night compared to these other businesses that are generally only used during the day. My other concern is that there's a daycare immediately north of this proposed site that in the mornings when I'm heading to work has significant number of children and traffic congestion. I can often have to, if you look at the shape of Dickens Drive, I often have to go around in order to go up Portsmouth because of the number of people entering and leaving that daycare. I'm just worried if that's been taken into consideration at all, pick up and drop off, because that property for the daycare is very small and has no on-site parking for drop off and pickup. And I'm just worried that an increased motor vehicle traffic could potentially cause potential harm there. Again, flooding, water sinks, all those things, I don't want to belabor those points. I agree with an earlier comment that given the size of the lot, there's some very nice townhomes and other residential, I assume rental units at Kingston, Portsmouth directly across from St. Lawrence College that I feel would be a more appropriate size for this lot than what is currently proposed. So those were my main points. And the last thing is I'm just wondering at the current proposed site at the higher units, are there going to be balconies that are immediately overlooking people's backyards? I know a number of my neighbors have pools and other things. I'm just worried that a building of this height without any true separation from the pre-existing single family dwellings would reduce our privacy in our own homes and backyards. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Glad. And then, Madam Clerk, I see we have one last speaker, so I think we'll go to our last speaker, and then we'll give the applicant a chance to respond. Mr. Radley, for your name and record your name and address for the record, and then we'll turn the floor over to you.
My name is Peter Radley. I live at 5 Authors Lane. Mr. Vice Chair, it's like being the last speaker at a banquet. Quite comprehensive statements have already been made, and I don't want to rehash things, but I want to go online and on record in saying there are some problems. In point fashion, we're going from 2 single-family residents to 63 units. It is not affordable housing, I don't believe, and never will be. As the applicant's representative indicated, it's going to be a student residence. The rents within this place would not be affordable by the ordinary working family, because I'm told the students in the Kingston area maximize bedrooms and are paying between $500 and $750 to $800 per person for a
Mr.
unit.
Riley, I'm just going to cut you off for just 1 second. Just a reminder that we are not going to speak tonight about other than land use issues. We can't people plan. So just be a little cautious in your comments around that.
But what I want to say then is that indicating that there are 63 units does not mean what the earlier lady said, reasonable unit bedrooms of 163 people. I've calculated it at over 200 people. 23 parking spaces is inadequate. There's no visitor parking. There's no delivery parking. There's no place for snow removal. The snow will be piled up. It will melt and it will go into neighbors' backyards. The unit is totally inappropriate for this area. There is no large apartment building in the immediate area at all. The city looked at this general site for intensification and they took it off the map. At the very corner is a Montessori school where the cars are coming and going and children are walking down the streets regularly, especially in the summer and the spring. The only other 2 units of interest on Portsmouth Avenue you've seen pictures of. One is the health unit, the other is on Granada. They are not 4 stories high. They do not provide enough parking. It took me, at the request of the residents of Authors Lane, 2.5 years to get the city to put up signs, no parking on Authors Lane. It was parking from 8 in the morning to 7 o'clock at night. And I don't think any of the councillors on the planning committee would appreciate that in front of their home. The intensification of this area is totally inappropriate. And as an interest point, I spoke to some of the people at the health unit why they were parking in front of our houses on Authors Lane. And you know what they said? It was almost impossible to get in and out of the health unit because of the intense traffic on Portsmouth Avenue. Now that there is St. Lawrence College, there's the new hospital, and there are going to be new multiple residentials built on the hospital property. If anything, Portsmouth Avenue is overused now. And to put this unit where there are no other apartments, residential and institutional, is totally out of place, totally inappropriate with the area. And despite what my friend Jonathan says, it is not good planning. And I doubt very much that the students that will occupy this building will keep their activities on this site.
30 seconds, Mr. Radley.
I'll give you a 30-second rest. Those are my comments. Just want to finish by saying this development, members of the planning committee, is totally inappropriate for this particular site. 2 residential units to 63 units. You just measure that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Radley. And we'll turn to the proponent to respond to those questions, and then we will give committee a chance to ask theirs. Mr. Benchkowski.
Sorry, I was speaking while on mute. To go over a couple of the questions, the garbage room is proposed to be internal. It is identified on the ground floor plan. It is approximately 260 square feet. It would have an internal compactor that would deal and would retain all the garbage internally, rather than having an exterior garbage bin that would be enclosed. It is internal to the building itself. In terms of walkways and permeability, yes, all walkways would be proposed to be permeable. It's very difficult to make a complete parking lot, parking area permeable, just again, because of the weight of vehicles and things like that. It's very tough to be able to achieve that and really have a parking area kind of stand the test of time. Dealing with I believe the third speaker spoke to those 3D graphics. I searched for 3D graphics of the adjacent neighbors. I did find them to put into them, but it essentially took every building as being the same size in addition to the institutional building to the south. So we're happy to provide a sun shadow study that would illustrate that appropriate 3D massing and how that would affect the neighboring properties. In terms of sightlines for coming in and out of the property, we do have the appropriate setback from the parking spots as well as some landscape buffer on the north that would allow for sightlines of pedestrians as well as vehicles traveling north along Portsmouth or pedestrians traveling north or south. That would help that. In terms of privacy and low overlook, there are no rear-facing balconies into that established interior residential portion of the neighborhood. So there is no in terms of overlook of exterior amenity space facing them. I'm not a transportation analyst. This proposal has been submitted with a TIS study that will be reviewed, as the committee knows, by a City of Kingston Transportation Department, and we would go from there based upon having those discussions. At this time, we don't have any feedback on that. And I think that really answers the questions. That's it on my end.
Thank you, Mr. Benchkowski. So I'm going to turn over to committee now for questions. Are there any questions from committee members? Councillor Osanich.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Through you, I was happy to see that at least for the thin area, the thumb, whatever, the finger, whatever we want to say, that that area will be left as is. And I think it's really important to leave the trees that are in there. It looks like from the maps anyway, that there are several trees along that finger, and that's definitely needed for like the visual buffer to like the neighbors, as well as to provide the noise buffer. So I think those trees should be left as is. When you look at the parking lot as proposed, yeah, like I share the same concerns as those neighbors. That I know that you've moved the apartment building further south so that there's not any shadowing onto those neighbors to the north, but then there's no buffer at all. Like it's just asphalt up against the fence to then their backyards. And like, in your opinion, can any trees be left as they are right now? Like we don't have a landscaping plan, right? So can any of the existing trees be left in that really narrow buffer area you have between the existing fence and the asphalt parking lot?
Mr. Benchkowski? Do you want to respond to that? You're on mute.
My apologies. I'm just going to bring up a survey showing the vegetation itself.
Sorry, Mr. Vice Chair, through you to the applicant. Unfortunately, you will not have screen sharing abilities. If there's something that's a part of the presentation that you provided, we're happy to put that up on the screen for you, but otherwise you'd have to send that to us via email.
No,
put it up.
Sorry, I was just bringing it up on my end.
Oh,
just
perfect. Okay. Sorry.
So again, our best efforts would be made to preserve any tree that is located on the site along there. That could be also mitigated through cedars, hedges, and things like that to mitigate any noise or even light pollution coming from that parking area. All lighting would be directed down onto the property itself.
Councillor Osanich?
Right. So basically then the comment I want in the minutes and for staff to consider for the comprehensive report is if we can do any underground parking. I know it's more expensive, but we have to make this compatible with the surrounding neighborhood. And if we did put any parking underground, that could therefore maybe preserve like a wider strip of the existing trees along, like that would be to the north and in that northeast corner of the property. So I just want that to be consideration, or even like what we had talked about in other developments is to have well, you can see the parking when you go to where the Sears was at Cap Mall, and you're driving in from Princess Street down to the old Sears building, and you have Sutton Mills, like those apartments there, and you can see two-tiered. I'm not sure, but if we could, you know, somehow still get a buffer of trees saved to the existing houses in that north and northeast corner. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sanich. Is there any other questions from councillors? Councillor Hutchison?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just wondering if staff could comment more on the question about the difference or conflict between single-family zoning versus the argument being given about the collector road. I know we have a nodes and corridor policy, and I would like to know more about how that impacts this particular type of proposal. Please.
Thank you, Councillor Hutchinson, and through you, Mr. Vice Chair. Generally, when we look at higher density uses like the one being proposed, those are to be located on arterial or collector roads. The kind of lower speed, lower capacity residential roads in the surrounding neighborhoods are more suited to the to single family dwellings. So from that perspective, Portsmouth does meet that locational criteria for added density.
Councillor Hutchison?
I think that's it for now. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Sanik, would you take the chair?
I take the chair and recognize you.
Thank you. So I have some pretty significant reservations. I'm going to start with one of them is density, because if I could ask Mr. Peggy, the density of this project versus the density that's currently allowed, can you just tell me what those two numbers would be?
Yes, through you, Mr. Vice Chair. I beg your pardon, I'm just scrolling through my report here. So in the B3 zone, which is proposed, which is generally for multifamily dwellings, the density is 123 dwelling units per net hectare, which is the calculation of basically how many dwelling units per the size of the property. What is proposed is 203 dwelling units per net hectare.
So that's almost double. And then I just want to kind of take us back to, because I know a couple of folks from the community asked about the Central Kingston growth study, which we just approved. And my understanding is that this piece of property was not included in that stretch of Portsmouth that was designated for intensification. Could I just get clarification on that?
Certainly, and through you, I guess it would be Madam Vice Chair. The property in question, you're correct, Councillor Hill, it was not included within the Central Kingston growth strategy. It falls just north of the area identified, that was identified on the east side of Portsmouth Avenue. With that being said, though, it doesn't stop a property owner from applying to intensify density on their property or a proposal. As Mr. Peggy has noted, intensification is encouraged and considered for properties that are located on arterial or collector roads and towards the edge of neighborhoods. And of course, they would be assessed against the existing official plan policies for intensification.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Vice Chair. That may be so, but we just went through an agonizing process of trying to establish the rules. We established the rules. We removed some sites along Johnson, and I suspect along Portsmouth as well. I think maybe this one from that, the focus of intensification. And here comes the first proposal, and it sort of flies in the face of those expectations that are laid out in the Central Kingston Growth Strategy. So, I think it's, I'm just speaking about our own credibility here. We went through this whole exercise, and here we are, with the very first proposal for development along this corridor, and it is completely opposite to what we recommended at the end of the day and what was approved by council. So I can't in good conscience see this kind of a proposal, see myself supporting this kind of a proposal down the road. I mean, I think you've got to take this back and take a long look at the level of density, at the compatibility with neighborhood buildings, at even some of the development along that street, because this is not consistent with the Central Kingston Growth Strategy that we just passed. And I would really struggle with this as it is right now. Thank you.
I return the chair to you. Yeah, I guess Mr. Park doesn't have anything more to say, so I return the chair to you.
Thank you. I take the chair back. Any other questions from committee before Councillor Hutchison?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just formulated my follow-up question I couldn't come up with before. And that is, and you were sort of getting at it, and part of one is density. And so what criteria would tip the balance between the argument about the collector road, which seemed to be the central argument before, and the argument for maintaining a one-family designation? An A1 zone, it's not quite that simple. It's got a number of other aspects to it. So I'm not asking staff to state a position, but rather indicate what the criteria are to be taken into account here.
Mr. Park?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Vice Chair. Councillor Hutchison, when we are looking at applications at this point in time, they're still going through technical review, so there's many aspects that we're looking at that may help make planning staff move towards a recommendation. It's not solely based on location on an arterial or collector road. It is looking at the compatibility criteria within the official plan. It is looking at the comments from our partnering agencies such as transportation, utilities, Kingston. So we assess all these items in making the determination. And again, the applicant is certainly, it's within their right to apply for what's before the committee tonight. It does not necessarily mean that's what's going to get approved. In fact, as we were reminded at the beginning of this meeting, no recommendations are being made tonight. So the process of this meeting is to collect information. It's for staff to hear that information as well as the applicant, and those will be assessed along with all the comments from technical agencies and departments.
Okay, so I take it then that all the aspects brought up by the residents and the proponent would be like things we've heard tonight, like overlook, shadowing. They said they would do a shadowing study. And is there anything else that comes to mind that you would be evaluating in particular to this particular site?
Councillor Hutchison, I see that Mr. Barr has appeared suddenly on the screen, so maybe I'll give Mr. Barr a chance to respond.
Thank you, and through you, Vice Chair, I just wanted to build upon the comments that were said before, because the official plan, and I feel like I say this frequently at meetings, the way it's designed is that new development in the city is evaluated. The criteria in the official plan are evaluative, and Mr. Park has identified all the correct policies that go along with that. In the official plan, though, there are specific criteria when locating medium and high density residential development that it has to meet, and the specific tests in the official plan for the location of high density residential include that the property is located, and there's 4 sets of criteria. So the first one is about where it's located, whether it's located in a center or corridor, in a site specific policy area or a secondary plan, or on the periphery of a low or medium density residential neighborhood. The next 2 criteria deal with walking distance to amenities like commercial uses and institutional uses, parkland, etc. And then the third one is that it's located on an existing arterial or collector road. So that really forms the basis for the first set of evaluation to see where it is appropriate in the city to locate higher density residential uses. And then from there, everything that Mr. Park outlined is also part of the criteria. So the compatibility criteria of the official plan, public comments from other partners and agencies within the city and external to the city, and everything we hear in public meetings, which forms part of our technical review.
Thank you. Thank you. My purpose here was not to, I've heard Mr. Barr speak eloquently on this a number of times. Was to flesh out for the public and the proponent for that matter, what the criteria were, and so they could all each sharpen their appreciation of what is actually happening here. And they made appropriate comments on both sides, but I think it's important for people to realize they should refer to the official plan and what is the zoning now, what does it allow and not allow. And that gives us planning grounds for whatever the decision is. That's what staff will be doing. That's essentially why I brought all this up. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hutchison. I do want to give Mr. Benchkowski a chance to respond to that if he wishes.
Yeah, it's really to echo the policies that form the basis for this application really are those official plan policies of appropriate intensification and how it fits with the kind of context of that, not only Portsmouth, but the interior of the neighborhood itself. The appropriate separation of 8 meters from the residential properties to the rear, in my opinion, is more than adequate, especially given that there is no balconies proposed, and really the siting of the building has been brought away from the residential building to the north to mitigate any impact. And I think that's really what I have to say to that.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from committee? All right, seeing none, then we will draw this public meeting to a close. I'd like to move right into the next one if folks are okay with that, or do you want a break? We'll move ahead. All right, so the next public meeting is an application for official plan and zoning bylaw amendments submitted by Patry Incorporated Developments on behalf of Ryocan Management with respect to the subject site located at 1300 Bath Road. So I'll turn it over to our planner for introductory comments. Ms. Grant.
Thank you, Chair or Vice Chair. I'm not sure which one to say through you. Yeah, so thank you. So this is a public meeting for what we know locally as the Frontenac Mall on Bath Road. So a public meeting, just reiterating that this is a public meeting, and like Ricardo or my colleague, Mr. Peggia, says a few times tonight, there are no recommendations or decisions being made at this time. This is really an opportunity for the proponent to present the proposal and receive feedback from committee and the public. So notice was provided for tonight's meeting in accordance with the Planning Act, which includes on-site signage, mail it to neighbors, and courtesy notice in the WIG standard. Notice will be provided in a similar manner ahead of any future comprehensive meeting scheduled for the application. And for those unfamiliar with the process, the comprehensive meeting is the stage at which a recommendation is put forward for the committee's consideration. And this meeting has not been scheduled to date as the application remains under technical review. In terms of public comments received to date, we have received 2 requests of individuals who were wishing to be added to our notification list, as well as 1 item of correspondence with comments that is included in tonight's addendum. And I also spoke to 1 individual at the planning counter last week looking for further information about the application, but they did not offer any formal comments. And for the committee's information, the applicant did lead a virtual open house on this application in February of this year, and further details about attendance and feedback at that meeting are provided in the public meeting report in front of the committee tonight. So that is all from me, and I will hand it over to the applicant.
Thank you, Ms. Grant. And speaking on behalf of the applicant is? I'm sorry, I don't have a name, but go ahead.
Can you hear me, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, and everyone attending tonight's public meeting. My name is Harry Frusios. I'm with the planning firm of Zelenka Priamo Limited. We are the land use planning consultants for Bayfield Realty Advisors and Patria Inc. Developments as it relates to this application. I also want to introduce Mr. Gabe Ciccone from Bayfield Realty Advisors and Ms. Latoya Powder, who's here from Patria Inc. Developments, and they will be in attendance as well to answer any questions you may have. I just did want to point out just a matter of clarification that RioCan Management is not part of this application. I'm not sure how that got in there, but the applicants are actually Bayfield Realty Advisors and Patria Inc. Developments, just to clarify.
Thank you.
Before I get into my presentation, I just wanted to thank staff for their efforts in working with us over the past several months and bringing this matter forward this evening. There's been a lot of productive discussion about the future development of this site, and we're happy to bring that forward to you this evening. And following our presentation, myself as well as Mr. Ciccone and Ms. Powder would be available to answer any questions you may have. Can I have the next slide, please? So just for the benefit of everyone in the audience, the north is at the top of the page. This is the subject property, 1300 Bath Road. To the northeast corner of the intersection of Bath Road and Centennial Drive. The site has an area of approximately 23 acres or 9.4 hectares. Currently, the lands are constructed with a 1-story commercial plaza known as the Frontenac Mall. It has surface parking areas in the front together with 3 smaller standalone buildings with an overall floor area of just over 300,000 square feet. The subject lands are highlighted in red on the exhibit, and then the first phase of development, which we'll be talking a little bit more detail, is highlighted in yellow on figure 2. Next slide, please. This slide basically just shows you the surrounding land uses surrounding the property. To the east, we have mid-rise residential apartment building and commercial uses. To the south, we have institutional lands that are used for the Collins Bay Penitentiary, as well as natural areas and open space. To the west is Centennial Road. Further to the west, there's a mix of commercial, light industrial uses. To the north, we have the existing spur line that runs across the north end of the property. And beyond that, we have existing medium density residential uses in the form of townhouses. Generally speaking, the lands are located along a major corridor within the city, which is Bath Road, where there's an existing bus rapid transit service to connect directly to the downtown. And that is shown by the blue line on the exhibit. And we know that there are a mix of uses along that corridor. Next slide, please. This is the land use schedule in the official plan. The subject lands are designated district commercial. The intent of this designation is to accommodate a broad range of retail and commercial space. However, the designation does allow for medium and high density residential uses, such as what is being proposed as part of this application. And just quickly, you can see that there's a mix of land uses in this area. You have residential to the north, you have your arterial commercial to the west, and your institutional and open space to the south and to the east. Next slide, please. The subject lands are currently zone C25, which is reflective of the OP designation that I just spoke to, and generally contemplates commercial uses on the property. As you all know, the city recently completed its comprehensive zoning bylaw review exercise. However, that exercise did not extend to the subject lands. Such a rezoning application is required to permit the intended uses of the property. Next slide, please. We also acknowledge that the city has been undertaking the exercise referred to as density by design, the intent of which is to provide direction for where the height and density could be best accommodated within the city. The proposed development is informed by the goals of the city to place height and density in appropriate locations. And in our opinion, this is an appropriate candidate for intensification on the site. Next slide, please. And now we get into the actual proposed development. And as I noted earlier, we're looking at bringing forward an official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment for the entire site. However, the first phase of development is required to proceed to build a 6-story building at the northeast corner of the property. It would require demolition of a portion of the existing shopping plaza, approximately 80,000 square feet. This discussion has been ongoing for several months with staff. It's our client's desire to make more efficient use of the subject lands in an area where growth is appropriate and to deal with current trends of where commercial and residential uses are appropriate. Prior to submitting these applications, we had several discussions about renovating and repurposing the existing commercial plaza to provide for upgrades to the existing building, but also to introduce residential uses, as you see in the highlighted red space. Now, as part of some of the highlights of the phase 1 development that we're seeking to get approvals for, the site itself that will accommodate phase 1 is approximately 3.85 acres. It will be severed from the rest of the property. However, they will continue to function together with the rest of the property through reciprocal operating agreements. As I noted before, the demolition of approximately 80,000 square feet of existing commercial space will take place to allow for a standalone 6-story residential apartment building containing approximately 290 units, which equates to 185 units per hectare just for that portion of the property. There will be at-grade outdoor amenity space to the south of the building. There will be an upgraded connection directly from Bath Road to the rear of the property where the apartment building is positioned. This upgraded connection is, sorry, I think, no, we're still on the same slide, I apologize. The enhanced north-south connection will be designed to accommodate sidewalks, bicycle facilities, and landscaped areas to promote walkability and efficient pedestrian connectivity to Bath Road, transit facilities, and the surrounding lands. There will be 336 parking spaces in total for phase 1 development, and majority of these will be located underground. And you do see that there are there will be some parking at grade around the perimeter of the property. And our client is targeting a LEED standard for this phase 1 building. Next slide, please. This is a bird's eye view of the phase 1 development. As you can see, it's behind the existing plaza. What I'd like to highlight here is the upgraded boulevard to the left of the slide between the two commercial buildings. And again, that will be designed to promote walkability and an enhanced connection between the phase 1 to Bath Street. Next slide, please. This slide shows the interface between the proposed apartment building and the renovated plaza. The renovated plaza, you can see it's on the right of the screen, and that is the rear of the building. And you can see there are major upgrades planned so that it doesn't appear like a back of a typical shopping plaza. It's meant to interface with the proposed apartment building. There will be connections to allow more efficient movement through the plaza in terms of a breezeway. The secondary access to the apartment building faces the mall. And again, this is just to show how the two uses will interact in this, we call it a unique situation where we're having the back of the commercial building facing a new building. But in terms of the design, we feel that this will work appropriately in terms of the interface and allowing proper connectivity between the two properties and within the overall site. Next slide, please. This is now the long-term vision for the entire property in terms of the full redevelopment conceptually. As part of our discussions with staff, it became clear that there was a desire and opportunity to create a long-term vision for the subject lands by introducing more intensive forms of residential development while still maintaining the commercial function of the site. So accordingly, we have proposed an official plan amendment that would establish the lands as an important node within the city. And we're still working with staff to establish appropriate parameters for the long-term redevelopment of the site that would include mixed uses. The future phases, as you can see on this exhibit, would require further removal of portions of the existing commercial plaza. However, these future phases are not intended to proceed in the near future. The long-term planning for this growth node will depend largely on prevailing market conditions and lease obligations with existing commercial tenants. Next slide, please. And this is just another view of the long-term development goal. The opportunity here is to direct and concentrate intensification and built form along Bath Road and Centennial Drive, particularly at the intersection of these two streets. Based on the concept plan that we've produced to date, there can be a total of approximately 1,685 units that can be accommodated. This equates to approximately 180 units per hectare for the entire property. And the height, as you can see, it's concentrated at the intersection. We believe that we can achieve a maximum height of 20 stories at this location, and then it would step down along the streets. There would be a commercial component included on the lower floors of the proposed buildings, which would likely account for approximately 32% of what is currently existing in the plaza today. And as part of this overall long-term goal, there will be a significant net increase in landscape and outdoor amenity area from what exists on site today through the provision of underground parking to accommodate the needs of the residential tenants. Next slide, please. We do recognize that through this phasing strategy that the existing commercial uses continue to provide an important role in the community. Consideration has been given to how these existing tenants would be accommodated through redevelopment. Our client intends to honor the existing leases of its tenants, and all tenants have been notified of the intention to redevelop the lands. All tenants affected by the first phase of development were approached very early in the planning process and were also offered new space following the redevelopment. Alternatively, tenants were also given the option of terminating their lease should they choose to relocate elsewhere. But of note, a number of commercial units are being retained on site for this phase, for the first phase of redevelopment. For example, the Boys and Girl Clubs recently signed a new long-term lease to remain in the plaza. It is acknowledged that there will be some temporary displacement of tenants during construction. However, every effort will be made to minimize the disruption to the tenants. Next slide, please. So in order to accommodate the proposed residential development as described and establish a future vision for the lands as a mixed-use node, applications for an official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment have been submitted to the city. The official plan amendment adds a site-specific policy to the Frontenac Mall area and is intended to provide specific direction for redevelopment in a comprehensively planned manner, while also recognizing the importance of the existing function on the site. We're still working through the details of the amendment with staff and suspect the specifics to be refined through the process. Similarly, the zoning bylaw amendment process proposes to implement the residential use by rezoning the lands and including site-specific provisions to facilitate the redevelopment. And again, we are refining this in consultation with staff. It's an ongoing process, but the ZBA will retain permissions for the existing commercial plaza as well as provide regulations for future residential development. Site-specific zoning considerations will be required possibly for the various phases. And as we've noted, the city has recently undertaken its comprehensive zoning review, and the amendment will seek to build in the new provisions that the new bylaw has placed and introduced elsewhere in the city. So in conclusion, the vision for the lands is for a phased, high-density, mixed-use community that introduces mid-rise and tall buildings on the site. The redevelopment is intended to shift the site from an autos-oriented commercial plaza to a livable community that provides opportunities to live in a variety of market-based housing sizes with numerous opportunities for local recreation and work opportunities as a result of the mixed-use format that introduces additional green space on the site. By intensifying these lands, the node is more supportive of existing transit and is encouraging of alternative forms of transportation to the private automobile. Overall, the proposed official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment, in our opinion, is consistent with the provincial policy statement and the city's official plan, as well as long-term growth initiatives. It represents sound planning principles and is in the public interest. The redevelopment is appropriate for the subject lands and addresses a need to provide more housing stock while revitalizing and strengthening the commercial function of the property. It is appropriate to comprehensively plan for the long-term redevelopment of the subject lands at this time to ensure a vision for the areas established, while not compromising existing operations and allowing for phased redevelopment that is flexible to respond to a range of factors. That concludes my presentation, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, and as I mentioned earlier, we're all available to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frucios. And so, Madam Clerk, we'll go to the public first if there are any questions from them.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, and through you, I will note that we do have 6 members of the public with us still at this time. So if there's anyone who wishes to speak to the current application on the floor, if you could please raise your hand in Zoom so that we may identify you. I'll just do another call for anyone joining us this evening who would like to ask questions or provide comment to the current application on the floor. Please raise your hand in Zoom. And Mr. Chair, we have 2 hands. So in the same procedure as the last files, we will receive all the comments at once and then allow the applicant to respond once we have received them. So Mr. Vice Chair, first to speak is Rob Caldwell.
Mr. Caldwell, your name and address for the record, and then the floor is yours.
Mr. Vice Chair, Rob Colwell, 1098 King Street West, Kingston. Used to ride my horse on that grounds, as a matter of fact. So longtime resident, encouraged to see they're trying to revitalize the mall. Yes, we need more housing units. I'm a little nervous about the 20-story height because it does not appear to include the extra floor required for the elevator heads and additional utilities that normally appear on the top of a building. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, our next speaker is Ms. Florent, I believe.
That is correct.
Ms. Florent, if you could state your name and address for the record, and then the floor is yours.
Nicole Florent, 1098 King Street West. I was pleasantly surprised with the proposal. I do have 2 comments though. I find that the towers, which you've located at the corner of Bath Road and Centennial, are perhaps not an eyesore, but they hit the eye. And if you're going to have towers, I would have thought in appearance that you would have them further in to that back building that you have behind your plan today. The second thing is with the existing commercial mall that you're keeping, I wonder if you have considered something that I saw in BC only so far, where commercial malls, new malls have residential suites above the Best Buy and those kinds of stores, which ends up with a 2nd and a 3rd story housing above commercial and would be helpful in the intensification. That's all.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, are there any other speakers?
I do not see any further hands, Mr. Vice Chair.
All right, Mr. Frucios, I'll give you a chance to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to both speakers who provided their comments. With the first speaker regarding the 20-story building, the plans at this point in time are still very conceptual. We haven't gone to any level of detail to show mechanical equipment and things like that, but that will happen. Again, the future phases are envisioned to be far down the future. We're really focused on phase 1 right now, and the phase 1 building will be in for site plan approval probably within the next week or so. But again, we take that comment and just to advise that at this point in time, the future phases are still conceptual at this point in time, and that kind of relates to the second speaker as well. We take those, we listen to your comments. I mean, when the time comes when the future phase will be developed, there may be some changes. Again, this will depend largely on the market conditions at the time and the lease obligations that they have with the existing tenants. In terms of commercial on the ground floor, that is going to be part of the proposal to allow commercial uses on the ground floor on those buildings at Front Bath Road in particular. How they operate and who the tenants will be, I mean, that's something obviously that will be determined down the road as market conditions dictate. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'll turn to committee if you have any questions. Councillor Osanich.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Vice Chair. I have a question. Let's see. So maybe it's because the plan that you saw, that the slide that you showed that was for the long-term growth, on Centennial Drive, it didn't show the traffic light. You know how right now we have the traffic light in front of Value Village. And so if you're trying to drive out of the mall right now, you can go left to go southbound on Centennial, and then on Bath Road, go west. Will now in the future phase like 2 and 3, you're going to have all towers along Centennial Drive, and your concept plan didn't show like this traffic lights. So how would someone then coming from the west end get into your development to go shopping at Food Basics? Because along Bath Road you have the medium in the center, so there's no way to turn left into Frontenac Mall right now from Bath Road, right? You have to turn left onto Centennial Drive and then make a right into there. And so to go, like, how would that work?
Mr. Frucios?
That's through you, Mr. Chair, and I believe the traffic signals were omitted erroneously. It wasn't intentional to omit them. In terms of traffic circulation, there is an intent to have cross traffic from Centennial into the plaza, as well as we're having the enhanced corridor from Bath Road to Phase 1. We'll also be producing to make sure we have connections from Centennial to the plaza as well. And those will all be done through the site plan process. We have done traffic studies to ensure that efficient movement will occur in and out of the site. So yes, that will be looked at more carefully as we get into the future phases.
Okay, great. And my second question is, like for Phase 1, personally, I wish Phase 2 and Phase 3 could all be built at the same time, because we need housing and we need apartments so badly, right? But anyway, I like the development, like from what I see. And so for Phase 1, like Swiss Chalet and Harvey's can stay there, right? From the concept plan, when you do Phase 2 and 3, where the Boys and Girls Clubs are, and the Sukira is at the restaurant right there. What happens with Swiss Chalet and Harvey's? Can that stay there when, like in the 25-year time frame when Phase 3 is built? Can there still be 2 restaurants right there on the southeast portion of the property?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, I believe the intent is to maintain as many of the commercial tenants as possible, as long as they're willing to stay, and they either whether or not they're accommodated in the same space or new space, that will be something that will be discussed with these tenants. But for now, our client is intent on honoring these leases, and whether or not the uses want to stay or not, that again, that's really what will determine when and how these future phases will advance, depending on who is available and who wants to stay and how they can be accommodated in the new development.
Okay.
I see Ms. Grant has appeared. So Ms. Grant, did you have something you wanted to add?
Thank you. And through you, just something minor to respond to the question from a zoning perspective. The applicant is not currently proposing to rezone kind of the portion of the property where the Food Basics is, and in front of that out to Bath Road. So the existing permissions for commercial uses there are proposed to be retained.
Great. Thanks so much.
Councillor Hutchison?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'm a bit curious about. I think when you heard about this this proposal, we were, pretty excited about it because of the redevelopment of the mall and commercial and residential mix. There's one thing that's concerning me though, and that is the question of what is your projected marketing for this? Like, what demographic are you thinking you're going to attract to this proposal?
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, Councillor Hudson, were you referring to the first phase or overall in terms of the final sort of the overall development scheme?
Both.
I will actually allow Ms. Powder, she represents Patria Inc., to respond to that. Thank you.
Ms. Powder?
Hi, Good afternoon. Thank you for that question, Councillor Hutchison. So typically we don't have like a target market. We try to provide inclusive communities. So if a single mom with a child wanted to come and live in our community, we're more than open to that. We're open to students, we're open to young professionals, couples. So again, like we don't really target anyone specific. It's more anyone that's looking for housing. We're open to, you know, renting to them. And this will be primarily a rental development. So again, anyone that's kind of looking for housing, we're more than open, and it will provide barrier-free units. So again, inclusive communities is kind of what we strive for.
Okay, so more directly, my concern is with amenity space and green space for people and especially children. And I didn't see a lot of that there. Lots of parking, lots of, and you know, there's a good side to this, and I recognize that. And lots of residential units, but the closest green space is across the road. And so one of my questions is, do you own that green space?
No, I don't believe that green space is in our ownership, but there is a sufficient amount of amenities.
It's not park space either, so but
no,
perhaps it's irrelevant. But I mean, what kind of amenity space are you thinking you're going to put on site? Because I just don't see it.
So in the slides, there was a green space amenity that's kind of in the right side of the building, along with a swimming pool. There'll also be gyms and other like party rooms available for the tenants to use at their discretion.
Sorry, if you could bring slide 8 back up again, that might be able to give you some better indication as to, and I apologize, you should have had a better slide that showed the amenity space. So you can see, as Ms. Powder showed you, we can see a little cluster of trees towards the right side of the building. That is intended to be outdoor amenity space, and there will be a swimming pool included as part of that as well. And in the future phases, we're going to have similar types of outdoor amenity space as well. And then as well, there's also consideration potentially for balconies, patios as well for each individual unit as we go through the site plan process.
I see. So,
just as one moment, Councilor Hutchison, Mr. Barr.
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you, and through you, Vice Chair, just 2 points of clarification. There is actually a really good plan within the public meeting report. It's on page 229. It's Exhibit I, and it's called the Conceptual Land Use Plan, and it lays out areas that are residential, commercial, and open green space. So it's clearly outlining on the property where this space is kind of currently being contemplated. And in addition to that, this application is not seeking a reduction to the amenity area that's currently within our zoning bylaw. So 18.5 square meters per unit has not been sought to be reduced as part of this application.
Okay, so that addresses some of the issues I have. My underlying question is, we're going to build all these units. What's the projected population, and how does that relate to the amount of amenity space that are afforded for? That's my concern.
Was your question answered then, Mr. Hutchison or Councilor Hutchison?
Not sure that it was. Okay, so that's why I asked it sort of again.
Okay.
I'm really raising this for staff. I look there and there's that green space where the swimming pool is supposed to go, but I see hundreds and hundreds of people living in that area, and I'm wondering what it's going to be like to live there. That's my concern, and I just wanted to raise that.
Ms. Grant?
Yeah, I don't know. Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair. I don't know if I have too much to add beyond what Mr. Barr had said, but our amenity area requirements are based on per unit, not per population or per bedroom. So that's what we will be reviewing it against. And your point is well taken in terms of making sure that those are attractive and usable spaces for the population. So review of specifically how those amenity spaces are designed would be undertaken at the detailed designs of the site plan control phase for each of the future projects. So phase 1 is where we'll be looking especially at the detailed design right now with kind of feasibility considerations for the future phases. So we would definitely take your point and we will connect with the applicant on that.
So we would presumably see that in the comprehensive report when it comes forward then?
Certainly, yes, we can provide some more background for you in that report.
Does that take care of it, Councillor Hutchison?
Yeah, I am. I like one further comment, and that is that the amount of space around high rises is notoriously badly used or poorly used because people don't want to use it. So I want the proponent and staff to take that into account. That's my concern. The proponent builds the buildings and they can feel good about that, but we have to deal with the neighborhoods afterwards. And they need to be decent places to live. Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Neal, did you have your hand up? I think you did. Councillor Neal.
Thank you very much. This is probably a question for Ms. Powder, but perhaps Ms. Grant may have a comment on this as well. I mistakenly said at a public meeting a little while ago that Mr. Patry has never, ever done affordable housing. And I was corrected. He has, in fact, included some affordable housing in a previous development, just never in the Williamsville area. So I was rightfully corrected on that. And I'm curious about this particular project, which is very ambitious and I think overall an interesting design, but our official plan unfortunately doesn't say thou shalt do 15% of affordable housing. It says you should do that, and very few developers actually do. Is there consideration for creating some affordable housing, and affordable being the terrible definition of 80% of market value, which isn't affordable to most people, but is there indeed a plan to offer some affordable housing?
Who would like to respond to that?
I can take that question.
Ms. Powder?
Yeah. So typically we do work directly with CMHC to provide units at affordable rates. And then they kind of provide developers with funding to help with constructing buildings. So for example, we recently had about 100 units approved under CMHC rental construction financing here in Kingston. And we did have 154 units approved in Canada for several other programs that CMHC has. And there we did 154 units. And our intent is to work with CMHC for each project that we have and ensure that like 20 or 30% of the units are dedicated at a deep affordable rate. And for example, in Canada, we did a project where it had their bachelor units are $1,600 a month, and we were able to do it for $900 a month. So that's kind of how we work with them directly to provide that type of attainable housing in those markets.
I look forward to that being part of the comprehensive report that comes to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sanek.
Thank you, Vice Chair. So to go along with Councillor Neal's question then, does that mean that some of these units can also be CMHC affordable? Since Canada, like you were able to do this in Canada, I think the units that Councillor Neal is talking about at other Patry developments in Kingston that do have some affordable units, I think it's, if my memory is right, is the apartment building right across the street on Armstrong Road, right across the street from this phase 1 on Armstrong Road. I think some of those units might be, lower price than average, and maybe also at Blackburn Mews, just going by memory, right?
Yes.
So can we try for this phase 1, 2, 3, have some units that way as well?
Yep. That is definitely something that we are intending to do. For example, at the 2274 Princess Street project, that's the one where we recently got 100 units approved under CMHC MLI Select. And so this is something that we're passionate about housing in general, and providing and working with CMHC and kind of providing those numbers that they need is kind of definitely something that we intend to do. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And for the other units, that will not be like below CMHC, right? Would the other units be more like, would you call them like they're going to be more mid-range? You know how some apartments have been built that I would consider luxury, because when I call them to see what the rents are, thinking about my parents along the line, they're, like you said, of that one in Canada that's supposed to be $1,600, $1,900 per month. Are we looking more at mid-range, or are we also like, are some of these units going to be luxury, which I would consider like $1,900 a month luxury?
I would say that it would be dependent on what the market rents are at the time that we bring them on. So, and I wouldn't say luxury, but they are definitely typically mid-range to maybe higher if you're on the upper floors, maybe. Okay. But yeah.
Okay, great. And I would imagine like these are 6 stories, right? And then some of them in phase 2 and 3 are even taller, right? Like I think it says 12 stories and other ones are 20 stories. So they would have even the 6 stories. Would they have a view, if you're one of the south units, like facing south, can you see the lake at the 6 stories? Will they be able to see the lake?
I am not 100% sure about that. If the 6-story would have a view of the lake, that's something we'd have to take a look at and see. But like you said, kind of the upper floors would have that view, but at the 6th floor, I'm not 100% sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to know, because definitely you're close to the lake. You have all the flat land of the prison system to the south, so there's nothing really blocking the view. And not that I want a luxury rate to go with if you can see the lake, but I think it would be a nice view for the top floors and all of the 3 phases that are going to be built. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? All right, seeing none, we'll bring this public meeting to a close. Thank you. And we're going to move into our business meeting at this point. So I'll call the meeting to order and ask for a mover to approve the agenda. Mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Stanek, seconded by Councillor Neal. All those in favor? Oh, sorry, I see the clerk waving at me. I must have done something wrong. Sorry.
Sorry, Mr. Vice Chair, just the addendum. I just needed that noted as well, please.
Right. The approval of the agenda, including the addendum. All those in favor? And that's carried. Confirmation of the minutes. Mover for the minutes. Moved by Councillor Stanek, seconded by Councillor Hutchison. All those in favor? Disclosure of pecuniary interest. There being none, no delegations, no briefings, no business tonight, no motions, no notices of motion, and no other business. The correspondence is as attached in both the agenda and the addendum. And the date of our next meeting is Thursday, June 16th. And so I'd ask for a mover to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Stanek, seconded by Councillor Neal. All those in favor? And we are adjourned. Thank you, folks. Have a great night.